Welcome back to Reach Out Reptiles, everybody. My name is Garrett Hartle, and you're going to want to watch this video if you like albino reticulated pythons. Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's all about the albinos. So albino reticulated pythons are among the very first morphs ever brought into the species. They're also, interestingly, among the very first things bred into superdwarfs. So the original, I think he was Malaysian, albino reticulated python was owned by Bob Clark, and he bred it into some Jampeanus reticulated pythons, and shortly after some nondescript locality superdwarf reticulated pythons as well. Those breedings actually happened as far back as the early and mid 90s. So it's some of our most highly selectively bred morphs that we have within superdwarf reticulated pythons. It's also, interestingly enough, presented some of the greatest challenges to shrinking down snakes, because for all of those early years of breeding, you know, everyone just focused on locality percentages or superdwarf percentages to make small snakes, not really paying attention to the actual size that the animals were growing to. And so it's been very difficult, it's taken much longer than it should have anyways, to effectively shrink the animals down. This young adult female is, she'll be breeding for the first time this year, obviously a very manageable size, and you might be thinking, holy smokes, that thing's way too colorful to be a superdwarf reticulated python, because a lot of the Calatoa superdwarf albinos that we see are a lot dingier in color. And if you were thinking that, you were right, because she's actually Jampeanus, which would be technically a dwarf albino. The funny thing is I have a lot bigger superdwarf albinos in my collection. So, you know, those breedings done right can really make a huge impact. But let's go back a little bit. First of all, I want to define what I'm talking about with albinos. Now, I'm specifically referring to what we call the Clark strain albino. This is a generic albino. If someone has a het albino reticulated python, this is what they're talking about. The original, classic Clark strain albino. Something really interesting happened in reticulated pythons that hasn't really happened, I don't think, in any other species that I'm aware when the first albinos were found. But within the Clark strain albino, there are three distinct color phases, and they have to do with the varying amounts of the animal's ability to express melanin. In other words, to manufacture the darker pigments in the snake itself. This girl is what we would call a white phase albino, still a Clark strain albino. There's also a Lavender Phase albino, which was the original Clark strain albino, and a purple phase albino. Now, the original albino was a lavender, and I can even remember being in high school when I should have been paying attention in class, looking at Reptiles magazines and stuff down here under the desk, and Bob Clark ran a vertical ad with the lavender albinos, gorgeous head sticking down like this, and you've got those lavender colors, the intense yellows, and then oranges down the sides, and it said, "You haven't seen colors like this since 1969, which was the year of my truck, Thomas. And yes, I like to talk about that truck a lot in my videos, because I like it. But something about those images just absolutely caught my imagination, and it was an animal that I always wanted to work with. So we now know that what makes that original Lavender Phase Clark strain albino is two distinct albino genetic traits. One would be a T-negative albino like this, which is very traditional. It looks much like your albino ball python or albinos in many species. T-negative, T refers to tyrosinase. It's an amino acid that helps to express the melanin. You got that? In other words, a T-negative albino means it can't produce any dark pigment on it at all, and the background areas on this snake are just complete, brilliant, utter white. Then there's a second one that we call the purple phase albino. It's still considered, you know, from a marketing term standpoint, Clark strain, but it's actually a separate genetic mutation. And in that form of albino, everywhere that you see white here, there would be a dark, contrasting purple coloration that was absolutely mind-blowing among these animals, because nobody had an albino in any species that looked like that. Those animals looked, I mean, they were like butterflies. So to have it in a python was something really spectacular. Turns out we were very lucky that the original was a lavender phase, because what happens is when you breed a white albino to a purple albino, these two separate traits are actually what we would call allelic traits, meaning they're on the same area of the animal's DNA, and blended together you get this kind of middle phase. And so a lavender has the brilliant bright white kind of glowing background color of a white phase, but it is able to produce a little bit of melanin, and the lavender coloration is just like a slightly lighter version of what the purple albinos display. Now, if that original albino had not been a lavender, let's say it was a white, we would only ever have white albinos until someone was able to find a wild purple albino, which I don't know that's ever been done. If it was only a purple albino, we never would have had the white phase albino, and I don't know that a white phase has ever been found again. It's possible there have been albinos found in the wild, but many of them have either or not proven to be allelic with the Clark strain albino. So because the original was a lavender, what happened was when Bob bred and made the first het albinos, half of those babies became het purple albino, half of them became het white for albino. Now that people are finally starting to grasp the allelic side of it, always say there's no such thing as a het lavender albino. And that is technically true. But a het albino from a lavender has a 50-50 likelihood of being either het white or het purple, and there's really no way to tell until you grow them up and breed it. Isn't that right, girl? Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay, now that we've explained what the three color phases within the Clark strain albino bloodline is, let's take a little bit of a close-up, deep dive into exactly what it is that makes each of these color phases unique to the others. So because those purple phase were so unique among animals in general, it's really kind of outshined the white and lavender phase, which are absolutely stunning animals in their own right. I mean, when you think of an animal that is as beautiful as a reticulated python, you know, these albino forms are absolutely stunning. In the white phase in particular, they almost seem to glow. They have brilliant, bright colors with absolute amazing saturation. The eyes, and on this girl's, they're actually quite unique. This girl's name is Tegan, and she's got some like frosty pink eyes almost. But they usually have a deep red eye. Anything that, like this Jampeanus cross, that's going to naturally have sort of a yellow head will have a really extreme version of it in the white phase. And the contrast between those whites and then the base, you know, the background colors where the saddles are and the side patterns just provide, I don't know, it's almost like a high definition color contrast for an albino. It's much more distinct than any, you know, like an albino ball python or something where the colors tend to blend together until you really start to get some other morphs in there. Just a simple white phase albino reticulated python is one of the most beautiful and high contrast albinos that you can possibly find. Okay, so now we have the purple. This is also a Jampeanus locality purple. So you're going to see a lot of the same traits from the locality influence as our white phase, as far as like the rich coloration, the gorgeous pattern. But a few things I want you to notice. Obviously, the most striking is that everywhere that last snake was brilliant, bright white, this girl has that dark, rich, color-saturated purple. And where the other girl had the bright pink red eyes, you remember those? Take a look at the eyes of this one. They are silver, almost as purple as the pattern on the snake itself. And the pupil slits look a lot darker too. So just like the white phase is its own genetic mutation, that is, if you breed a white phase to a white phase, you'll get all white phase. The purple is its own genetic mutation, and actually the most common albino strain in the dwarfs and superdwarfs, just because they were favored initially in those early days. So it's actually quite rare to find lavender and white phase superdwarf reticulated pythons. Now, while the dorsal pattern, that is what's normally black on the snake, is a really vibrant, beautiful purple coloration, I don't know if you can notice, but the background color on these animals is a little bit, let's say it's dingier. So it has kind of an ashy gray base color underneath where the yellows and the oranges appear. This is an absolutely phenomenal purple and a very good representation of what the morph can do, but this one has far more yellow coloration, especially around the head and dorsal, than you're normally going to find, especially on the super dwarf reticulated pythons, which are typically much more of an ashen gray than the really vibrant Jampeas are. Now when you take this purple and you breed it to a white phase, you'll actually get the original and what is the mixed allele morph of albino reticulated python, which we call lavender. So if you breed white to white, you get all whites. You breed purple to purple, you get all purples. You breed white to purple, you get all lavenders. Do you follow? So what do you get when you breed lavender to lavender? You actually get all three. That's why probably my personal favorite would be like this gargantuan old girl right here, a lavender phase. So with the lavender phase, you get that straight down the line, really bright yellows like the white phase has for the background, but you get the contrasting darker color replacing the black of the lavender because it produces about half as much of that melanin that the purple phase does. And when you breed lavender to lavender, you get all three color phases. So as a breeder, it's a really exciting animal to work with. If you can't decide which phase is your favorite, go for the lav. When you breed them, you get all three. Just make sure you understand where your bloodlines are, because this, after all, is a super dwarf albino. Just goes to show that the the label isn't everything. Now you know the three phases. Let me show you one of the coolest combos that I've been able to work with in Clark strain albinos. What we have here is also a purple phase Clark strain albino, but this is what we call a snow, which means it's the albino bred into another recessive morph called an anery. If you need to learn about what aneries are, you're going to check out this video right here. Come on, girl.